Okay, so let's chat through some Enneagram stuff. Today we are going to be talking about the head triad. So let's kind of just get back into the gut and the heart so that we can kind of understand the head by contrast. So remember, all the way back to the gut. The gut are the true feelers. The gut triad is this wave of emotion that comes as a reaction to a wave of stimuli hitting at all times, every given moment. It's just something that must be reacted to, and gut people have that reactionability inside of them. And notice that, there were three flavors of that. There were the fighters, let's bring it on, I'll react, which are the eights. The escapers, the avoiders, which are the nines to that wave constantly hitting them. And then the reformers, the ones who say, let's just fix this. This world is wrong, and everything must be fixed. And for ones, that hits them as a wave. Then we got to the heart. And the heart, we said, were kind of known as the feelers. However, the heart don't feel in the way that the gut people do. The heart people are taking their feelings and running it through a separate processor. And that separate processor for people in the heart are other people's feelings, other people's outlook, and other people's view of them. And that is really, really important in the heart. You're constantly gauging, how are people viewing me? And that is going to affect how I feel. And so that those feelings are being diverted. They're being processed through another section of yourself. The head people are often called the non-feelers, which we already talked about. This is a little bit of a misnomer. It's not true that the head people don't feel at all. And I think that's an important point that we want to make here at the outset. Head people do feel. However, head people, like heart people, are running those feelings through a secondary processor. And for head people, that processor is the mind, the intellect, a sense of reason and rationality and logic. And it's everything is done up here in the brain. Because of that, because the brain tends to be a little bit more unattached, a little bit more less emotional, right? That's why sometimes head people get labeled as non-feelers. They come across as though they don't have feelings, even though that's not really true. Certainly everyone has feelings. Okay, so there's a very quick overview of the head. And now as we get into each of these specific numbers, you're going to get a specific flavor of what that looks like. In general, the sin of the head is fear. Okay? So fear is the overarching for all of these numbers. But just as with each of the other triads, every single one of these specific numbers in the head is going to have their own flavor of that fear, and fear is going to look very, very different for each of the three numbers. So let's start with the 5. The 5 is the investigator or the observer. Of course, just like we've been doing with both the gut and the heart, we're going to skip wings and integration and disintegration for now, and we're going to move right to the main sin. The sin of the 5 is greed. And just as with a lot of these numbers, greed takes a very distinct manifestation that doesn't look exactly like what we tend to think of greed. We tend to think of greed specifically as it has to do with finances, with money, right? That someone who is greedy is someone who wants to gain as much of as much money and as much financial resources as possible. It is possible that this could be part of how a 5 is wired. It is possible that a 5 could be greedy in that sense. But it's not necessary. Because what we really mean by greed here is not just financial resources, but resources in general. Maybe even the best way to put this would be not finances, but energy resources. The 5 is going to be at all times very conscious and very protective of their time and energy resources. They are going to hoard that for themselves. They are not going to be willing to share that with very many people at all. And we're going to talk about what that looks like as we get deeper into the 5 here. Notice then that their virtue is generosity. So, as with all of these numbers, the opposite virtue is very possible. And in fact, some of the 5s that I've known in my life have been very, very generous. Not necessarily always with their time and their energy, but some of them tend to overcompensate in this way by being very generous with their finances, interestingly enough. At least a couple of the ones I've known. I can't generalize that, but certainly some of the people that I know personally, that has been true of. And it feels like an overcompensation on their part, that they know that they are very hesitant to give themselves as a resource, and so they find something that they can give away, such as, for example, money. Okay, so the head orientation. Fear is the sin of the head, as we just said, and the 5 reacts to that fear by withdrawing. So what exactly is the 5's greatest fear? The 5's greatest fear is that they will, at the end of the day, after they have interacted with all the people they have to interact with, they have done all the tasks that they must get done during a given day, that they will be so depleted. They will have given so much of themselves away, and their energy and their time and the resource of self, that there will be nothing left at the end. There will be nothing left for them. They will be completely devoid, completely emptied, to the point of having reached a state of nothingness, I suppose you could say. And so, because of that, they react to that fear by pulling back. They pull away from relationships. They pull away from situations that are going to require a lot of that personal resource of themselves. Because of this, they tend to be introverted people. Is it absolutely 100% of 5s that are introverted? Maybe. Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's hard for me going through the 5. It's hard to say that there could be an extroverted 5, because an extrovert gains that energy from interaction with other people, and a 5 is very much in that introverted place where they cannot, they will be depleted of energy by being around people. And giving of themselves into these personal relationships depletes them. It does not fill them. So I would say yes, probably if you are an extrovert, you are not a 5. And this is interesting for me because when I first read through, there were aspects of the 5 that connected with me and I resonated with, but I kept getting hung up on the introversion extroversion thing because I'm like, I'm not an introvert. And so could I be a 5? The answer is probably no. And so you'll see that I'm not a 5, but I do have a 5 wing, and we'll get to that later when we get into wings. Okay, so we already talked about this a little bit. Let's go through the notes that you have in front of you there. They believe that every potential interaction with another is a depletion of themselves. It's a depletion of their built-up resources that they are very greedy about. They must keep those for themselves. They cannot give that away because that would be giving all of themselves away. They tend to then withdraw into the mind to escape and avoid this reality. So the mind, their own mind, is their safe space. That's their safe place that they can use to get away from the world that needs too much from them. They hoard resources, and we already started talking about what this looks like. This can look like information. It can look like time, knowledge, privacy, personal interaction, and this is their reaction to their fear of being depleted. Because of this, 5s can withhold love and intimacy. It can be very difficult to connect romantically with a 5 You have to go in knowing that you'll only get little bits of them at a time and only as much of them as they're willing to give away at any given moment in time. They often can appear to be loners because of this. They can also seem emotionally indifferent. They can be very aloof seeming, right? This might have some similarities with the nine. The nine, the peacemaker, can feel aloof. They can feel emotionally detached from people and from situations. The five very much is in a similar boat. That they will come across maybe similarly to the nine. This is a very interesting thing about fives, and a lot of people that I know who are fives and who are really close to fives talk about this being a very, very distinct part of the fives' lives. They tend to separate the different areas of their lives from each other as a means of protecting that privacy, which is very important to them. That privacy that if they lose, it feels like a depletion of themselves. So they might also, for example, let me give you an example. A good friend of mine who is married to a five told me that her husband, who is a five, at one point there was an occasion where a bunch of his friends at work, she came to meet him at work or something, and they were all there at the same time. And she was blown away as she began to talk to these people about how close they were with her husband. They were like, yeah, I've been working with this guy for 20 years, and we're so close. We eat lunch together every day. And she's like, I've never heard this guy's name before in my life. How have I never heard of my husband's best friend at work that he's eaten lunch with for 20 years straight every single day? And she was blown away by this. And this is this separation of worlds, separation of areas of life. Her husband wanted to keep his work life and his work relationship separate from his home because that felt too intrusive into his privacy resources. Similarly, they might not divulge a whole story. If you ask them for the story of how something went, you are not likely to get a big, long rant from a five. But put a little asterisk on that because there is an exception that I want to tell you about in just a second. And we'll get to that here in just a second. There is one way that they do tend to overshare at times, as maybe as an overcompensation. Next point. They tend to substitute analytical information for emotional connection. They tend to be very, very interested in statistics, numbers, analytics, systematic ways of seeing the world. Knowledge in general is very, very important. They tend to be very good at trivia because they hoard knowledge. And this knowledge that they can gain feels like to them that they are storing up resources. Knowledge equals resources in their mind, in their worldview. And so it feels to them every time that they're able to gain new knowledge that they have repleted themselves. They have stored up something that will be helpful to use later. And so that's really important. And here's where I want to come right back to that divulging the whole story, the asterisk that we put there, the exception. Because knowledge tends to be the exception. If you ask a five about something that they are very knowledgeable about, you very well might get a whole barrage of information thrown your way. Probably because it's an overcompensation again. They tend to withhold. They deep down realize that they've been withholding maybe a little too much of themselves, and so they look for a safe space. Notice that anytime we're talking about the head, safety is a big deal. So what feels safe and what feels unsafe to people in the head? To a five, unsafe would be sharing the part of themselves that feels too deep down, too vulnerable, such as emotions, such as personal relationships, such as an entire story of something that happened to them or something that's going on in their life. That's too much. That's unsafe. But safety is found in knowledge for fives, and thus they might be willing to overshare even with you some of their knowledge that they've been gaining in some area of where they work or some hobby that they're currently hot on. Notice then that knowledge is being used as a layer of protection for them. It's the thing that they're willing to put out there, just enough to put a layer of protection so that you don't come deeper into those aspects of themselves that they're not willing to share, that they're not willing to part with, those personal resources. Their tendency towards solitude can lead to isolation. This is something that fives have to be very, very careful about. They do not allow themselves to kind of hold themselves up in a room apart from everyone and then realize like, oh, it's been 2 weeks since I've seen anyone. This can be easy for fives to do because it feels safe. It feels safe to them to protect those resources. Fives can be very unbiased and very neutral observers and arbiters because of their head orientation, and that combined with their quest for knowledge, they tend to look at things from a very rational, very logical point of view. And the mind, as opposed to either the gut or the heart, does tend to be the most down the middle, the most unbiased, the most fair, you might say. And so, these people can tend to be good counselors sometimes, which is interesting, right? Because you feel like that counselor relationship is a very personal, deep connection. But actually, fives tend to be good counselors because they don't allow themselves to get into a personal connection that might betray them, that might result in bad advice because it's coming from the heart, which is deceitful, or the gut, which is reactionary. And so it's interesting that fives can tend to be, on a good level, pretty good arbiters and neutral observers. A lot of the fives that I know are very funny. They have a very humorous sense of irony about the world because they're so detached. They tend to see the world from an interesting outside perspective that maybe others of us don't ever get a chance to step back and view from the outside the way they do. If you want to know how to get on a five's bad side as quickly as possible, the worst thing you can do is surprise them or introduce a ton of unpredictability into their world, especially regarding feelings, that which is most protected for them in their greed, in their quest to hoard resources. Springing something at the last minute on them, like a social engagement. Hey, sorry, hun, I forgot to tell you that I scheduled a dinner with our friends Betsy and Bob tonight in 2 hours. Oh my gosh. A five is going to come undone. They haven't had the time to prepare themselves for what that's going to cost. How much of themselves they're going to have to pour into that conversation, that engagement, that event. So that can be really, really unnerving for a five. Okay, let's look at the growth and the helping of a five. What does growth look like for a five? Growth would be to interrupt the circuit of thinking, to be so embedded in the head, by leaning a little bit into the body and leaning a little bit into self-disclosure. So what we want to do for a five, what a five wants to do, is they want to, as much as they can, be able to share a little bit of themselves. Find something that feels safe to share and take a step toward that. Don't hoard all of yourself, because that's going to just cause you to curl up and curl up too much and withhold too much of yourself, and that's not good for any of us as humans, because we are created to be relational beings. Look up the 1 John verse. I will tell you that as I am making this video, I do not actually have a Bible with me. So look up 1 John chapter 4, verses 7 through 8. I'll give you just a second to look that up. You can stop the video here and look that up, and someone read that aloud and maybe talk about how that feels like it relates to what we've just been talking about with the 5. Okay, hopefully you've looked that up and you're back now. And let's finish here with helping a 5. So helping a 5 then is doing everything possible to get them on that track where they can share a little bit. So how do we do that? Biting them off into littler pieces. Not the person, not the don't bite the 5 off into little pieces. Bite off little pieces of emotion, little pieces of feeling, little pieces of personal interaction and personal engagement that they can chew on at a time, that they can process at a time, and they can share at one given time. Don't overwhelm them with everything at once, but help them just slowly step up the amounts of themselves that they're willing to share and that they're able to share. I would take a few minutes now. Stop. This video is going to be over. I'll also make a 6 and a 7 video. But for now, this will be the end of this video. And what I would recommend you guys do is talk a little bit about this. Is this, what parts of this, or any of you feel like you might be 5s? Does this resonate with you? What did you notice as I went through this? Do you know anyone else, without naming names, without typecasting people? Do you know people that maybe show some of this? This tendency in their lives. And maybe just talk through that a little bit, help you process it a little bit more. If you have questions, if there's something that wasn't clear, write those down. I'll have my phone with me on vacation. Send it to me. Send me a question. And of course, I'll probably ask you to do this with the Bible stuff as well. And I'll be on my phone every once in a while on vacation. So I would love to still engage with you guys and interact with you and answer any questions that you have. So feel free to text it to me or put it on the group me if you have any questions about the 5. All right, that's it for now. I'm going to stop this, discuss for a few minutes, and then start the 6 video next.